Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu wa sallam ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa tabi'ina lahum bi ihsanin ila yawm ad-din wa alayna ma'ahum wa fihim bi rahmatika ya arhamar rahimin. We intend to learn and teach, to remember and remind, to give and receive benefit and gain, to encourage adhering to Allah's book and the sunnah of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi wa sallam, to call to guidance and lead to all that is good, seeking in that Allah's countenance, pleasure, nearness and reward. Glorious and exalted is He. We intend what the author, Al-Habib Ahmad bin Zayn al-Habashi, rahimahullah, intended, as well as our sheikhs and the pious, and what Allah knows of good intentions, and we ask Allah to accept by His mercy, and He's the most merciful of the merciful. La ilaha illallah. Continuing this lesson and completing, inshaAllah, Hajj today. We talk first about integrals of Hajj and Umrah, then about wajibat, duties of Hajj and Umrah. Today we will talk about forbidden things and missing parts of Hajj. In our last lesson, we asked Allah to enable us to answer questions about the validity of tawaf and sa'i, using your notes in your book. So here's a scenario. Someone is so elated to enter al-Masjid al-Haram, and they're happy to see the door of the Kaaba. They run up to the door of the Kaaba and hang on a little bit, start their tawaf. Go around to the door one time, come back around to the door another time, till they came around and ended up at the door 7 times, starting at the door. Have they completed their tawaf? Why? Start at the black stone, which is to the left of the door. And you're going from the black stone and you pass the door, you pass the Maqam of Ibrahim. Tayyib. Someone is just in love with the Kaaba. They're drawn to it like a magnet. And their heart is attracted to it so much so that they want to touch it. And they're doing tawaf, starting at the black stone. It's on their left. They're outside of the masjid. They're outside of the Kaaba. However, they go to the Rukn Yaman and touch the Rukn Yaman, which is Sunnah. They're so excited that they got to touch the Rukn. They say, hey, if I just keep going, I'll be able to touch the black stone. So they climb up on the Shadarwan, the buttress at the base of the Kaaba, and walk along that till they reach the black stone to kiss it. Do they complete one rotation? Why? Yeah. Yeah, because the buttress at the base, in some directions, actually extends beyond the original foundation, so you're walking over the Kaaba at that point, and you're not outside of the Kaaba. We have, sorry we're doing all invalid scenarios, but one understands things by their opposites. Someone loses ablution after going around the Kaaba 6 times. Can they go around the 7th to complete it? Nope. And we didn't say this, but what you do is they renew ablution and continue. Yeah.
You continue that one more?
One more, yeah. You build on what you've done. Yeah. La ilaha illallah. And the awrah has to be covered. Okay. So for Safa, where do they start going between Safa and Marwa? Safa. And when they go from Safa to Marwa, and Marwa to Safa, how many times do we count that as? 2. Very good. Yeah. And Safa to Marwa is pretty easy. You don't. It's sunnah to be in tahara. It's sunnah that the awrah be covered. La ilaha illallah. Now, from memory, what are the duties of Hajj? How many are they and what are they? From memory. 5. That is correct. 5. What are they? Ihram from the miqat.
Spending the eve of the 10th or of the day of slaughter in Muzdalifah.
Spending the eve of the day of slaughter in Muzdalifah.
The 3 nights of Tashriq in Mina.
Spending the 3 nights of Tashriq in Mina.
Stoning the Jamia.
Stoning the Jamarat.
And the farewell
And the farewell
Tawaf.
Tawaf. And the relied upon position is actually, it is not a duty of Hajj, it's an independent duty. So your Hajj is complete and you have that independent obligation if you didn't perform the farewell Tawaf. In either case, it requires dam, a slaughter. La ilaha illallah. Okay, so those are 5. What is the time for ihram from the miqat? What is the time for ihram from the miqat?
Is that the 10 days of Dhul Hijjah and then 2 months before it?
Yeah. Shawwal, Dhul Qa'dah, and 10 days of the Hijjah. That's the time for it. So when does it go out? It goes out with the rising of the dawn on the 10th of the Hijjah. If you're not in ihram and have got to Arafah, you can't do Hajj that year. Allah. How is the Mabit bil Muzdalifah? How does one spend the night at Muzdalifah?
For a moment between Maghrib and Fajr.
A moment is correct. Is it between Maghrib and Fajr?
Past the midpoint of the night.
Yeah, a moment past the midpoint between Maghrib and Fajr. Right? So the midpoint between Maghrib and Fajr, say it's a 12-hour night. 6 hours. After 6 hours, by 1 moment, you have to be at Muzdalifah in the night, and then you can go on. Sunnah to remain till the dawn prayer, and pray it there, and then move on. La ilaha illallah. What is spending, or let's say stoning the Jamarat? When does the time enter to stone the Jamra on the day of Nahr? The midpoint of the eve of the 10th. When does it go out?
At the end of the days of Tashriq.
Maghrib on the end of the days of Tashriq. Tayyib, the stonings of the 3 Jamras for the 11th. When does their time enter and end? On the 11th of the Hijjah. Yeah, after the Zawal, which is what prayer time? Dhuhr. When the Dhuhr time comes in, they enter. The stoning enters for the 3 Jamras on the 11th of the Hijjah. When does it go out?
The end of the days of, Maghrib
Maghrib on
on the end of the days.
the end of the days of Tashriq. And similarly the 12th, and if one stays, the 13th. What does spending the night at Mina mean? Al-Mabit bil Mina. Or bi Mina. Al-Mabit bi Mina.
More than half of the night.
The majority of the night, which is more than half. Mu'dhamul layl. You have to spend the major part of the night at Mina to accomplish that duty. La ilaha illallah, and the Tawaf al-Wada' is done as the last thing prior to departing Mecca. On our school, which is tough. It's a little bit tough because it's not easy to move around Mecca with the crowds. And they want you to do nothing, like not shopping or anything afterwards. Though waiting for things associated with travel, like waiting for your buses to come, that would be acceptable. The Hanafi school, you can do Tawaf al-Wada' after Tawaf Ifada. And this year when we made Hajj, many of the Hujjaj did that. It was very hard for them to get back and forth to the Haram. And some of them did Tawaf al-Wada' after Tawaf Ifada. Our school, it has to be the last thing. La ilaha illallah. Tayyib, so we will do missing a part of Hajj and prohibitions during Ihram. And we ask Allah to enable us to be able to explain how to compensate for missing an integral, a duty, and a sunnah of Hajj. So what does someone do who misses an integral? What does someone do who misses a duty? What does someone do who misses a sunnah? Enable us to list the prohibitions of Ihram that are in our notes and La ilaha illallah, Risala Jamia. So using our notes, list the prohibitions we've been given up to this point, and explain partial and full release from ihram, which is not in your text. You're going to have to pay attention at that point and take it in your notes. Okay, so we want to explain how to compensate for missing an integral duty, sunnah, to list the prohibitions that we get in this class, and also how to release oneself, explain partial and full release from ihram. So our author says, we have talked about La ilaha illallah, integrals and duties. Everything else is sunnah, and the sunnahs are many, and the sunnah should not be deemed as insignificant. That's an expression of our love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah enabling us to do so is a sign of our love for Allah, or our doing so sincerely is a sign for Allah, our love for Allah, and Allah enabling us to do so is a sign of Allah's love for us. And if one is cautious in the sunnah, one is likely to attain the benefit of a given work. Someone who neglects the sunnah, it's not unlikely they'll be punished by falling into makruh. Someone who's negligent about makruh, it's not unlikely they'll be punished by falling into the muharram. And we seek refuge in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from that. So sunnah is really important. The Prophet ﷺ said, "Khudu anni manasikakum." Take from me your rights. And the ulama are so specific about some of his sunan, they'll say, enter Mecca in the direction he entered. Enter the masjid from Bab Bani Shayba through the door that he entered. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Minute details, they pay attention to the sunnah of Al-Habib Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And we should do so. So there are many sunnahs of Hajj and Umrah. From them, at-talbiyah, shi'ar al-ihram. The emblem of those in ihram, labbaik Allahumma labbaik. Some of the athar of the Prophet ﷺ, everything in the creation says labbaik with a believer when they say labbaik. It's a very powerful invocation associated with our relationship to Allah and our covenant with Him. Tawaf al-Qudum is a sunnah. Right? There are 3 tawafs on Hajj. One of them is sunnah. And that is tawaf al-Qudum, the arrival tawaf for someone doing ifrad. Someone doing a Hajj before Umrah, they do an arrival tawaf. And they can actually put sa'i after that. But it's a sunnah tawaf. The 2 rak'ahs prior to entering ihram are sunnah. Wearing white in ihram is sunnah. A man could have blue ihram clothes. He could have 2 big blue towels. It would be acceptable. If his awrah was covered and it was pure and so on, it would be acceptable. White is sunnah. Ghusl before ihram, cutting in the hair and nails and so on. Wearing perfume, doing the 2 rak'ahs before ihram, doing talbiyah, entering Mecca the way the Prophet ﷺ did, entering barefoot, doing ghusl before one enters Mecca, the dua when one sees the Kaaba, tawaf, qudum, that's a sunnah. The sunnah, 2 sunnah prayers after tawaf, drinking from Zamzam, dua at the multazam, many sunnahs. Going on the 8th to Mina and spending the night, the Yom at Tarwiyah, going to Mina on the 8th and spending the night of the eve of the 9th at Mina prior to moving on to Arafah is sunnah. Then the pilgrims move on to Arafah and ideally to the masjid there, and the imam of the Muslims gives a khutbah explaining them the upcoming rites, and then after Dhuhr time they enter Arafah. That's a sunnah. At Arafah, exposing oneself to the sun, standing for dua, standing near the stones, the boulders at the base of Jabal Al-Rahma where the Prophet ﷺ did. That's sunnah. Joining between the day and the night at Arafah is sunnah. Then moving on to Muzdalifah, spending the night beyond the middle of the night, except for ladies and people with an excuse, they should go on early. Praying Fajr at Muzdalifah, doing Dhuhr and Asr at Arafah first, combined, and then Maghrib Isha combined. All of those, many sunnahs. So there are many sunnahs of Hajj and Umrah, and one should endeavor to do those. However, one should not be rigid about times, because you can place yourself and others in a lot of danger or fatigue. by being too particular about the time and manner in which you do a given work. And the group you're making Hajj with is likely to have people that are old, people that have mobility difficulties, and then also the people conducting the Hajj group has to manage hundreds of people. So be somewhat lenient about some of the details, because a modern Hajj can become very dangerous if you're not careful, and the stampede can kill you. Ta'ala. So don't place the sunnah over the safety of others and yourself. Harming someone is forbidden, and one doesn't harm someone in the interests of a sunnah. That's a general rule. La ilaha illallah, especially at the Black Stone. Allahumma lakal hamd. So in any case, there are many. So the author says the sunnah include acts which should be done but which are not included among the arkan and the wajibat. So everything else is sunnah. That's the nice thing of these treatments. You know the arkan and the wajibat, khalas, that's what you have to do. Everything else is sunnah. And they're concise. So missing out a part of Hajj. What happens when we miss out a part of Hajj? Whoever misses out a rukn, his Hajj will not be valid. And it is not permitted for him to leave the state of ihram until he completes it. Big problem to stay in ihram for a year. So make sure you do the rites and complete them before you leave. So you get to Arafah in ihram. That completes most of the Hajj. So all that remains is tawaf, sa'i, shaving and shortening. Tayyib, tawaf requires purity, ritual and physical purity. So what does a woman do who menstruates? She does what Sayyidatina Aisha did, radiyallahu anha, and she waits. She waits until she is pure and does ghusl to complete her tawaf. And she remains in ihram until then. And those traveling with her are required to wait with her on our school, as is the view of the vast majority of the ulama. La ilaha illallah. An atonement payment of the penalty known as dam will not make up for it, nor will anything else. Meaning you can't slaughter a lamb like you would slaughter for udhiyah to make up for missing an integral. That's what he's saying. As opposed to a duty. A duty, a complete duty that's missed will typically entail slaughtering. Like if you miss ihram at the miqat, you get all the way to Mecca and you didn't do ihram yet, and you don't go back to the miqat, you have to slaughter. La ilaha illallah. He goes on. 3 of the arkan will always be binding as long as the person performing Hajj is alive. You could also understand he has the rest of his life, or that she has the rest of her life to complete these. So there's plenty of time to do these 3. No need to rush, but obviously you're not released from ihram until you do them, 2 of them. The tawaf, the sa'i, and the shaving or cutting of the hair. Right? So tawaf, sa'i, shaving and shortening the hair, removing part of 3 hairs, those remain as long as you're alive. So you have plenty of time to do them. So that is basically integrals. You have to complete all the integrals, excluding getting to Arafah in ihram. The other 3 you have as long as you're in the world. You have all your time in the world to complete them, but you are not released from ihram until you do 2 of those, along with 1 other of the duties. So that's something to be aware of, and we're going to talk about how you come out of ihram. We enter ihram, and then there's a way that you're released from ihram. La ilaha illallah. Are there any questions about that? Yes, sir.
So what's the tasawwur of a person being stuck for a year? Is that they went into ihram and they didn't make it on the 9th?
No, they do dam ihsar if they do that.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a way when you're prevented from making it to Arafah, you release yourself by slaughtering, and shaving, like the Prophet ﷺ did for Hudaybiyah. They entered ihram, tried to make umrah, got prevented, cut their hair and slaughtered their animals and released themselves. Made it up the next year. Yeah, but so it's not that. It's someone gets to Arafah in ihram, and then doesn't do it right, masakin, or travels without finishing. Yeah, masakin. Yeah. It's actually a sunnah or a recommendation the ulama mentioned to travel with learned people. And especially towards the end of Hajj, you got all kind of questions coming. How do I complete this? How do I complete that? It's really important because it's not hard. Once you get to Arafah in Ihram, everything else can be amended as long as you have access to people that can help you do it. No. And La ilaha illallah. Next, whoever misses out a wajib, which is translated here as duty, a duty, his Hajj is valid. So the Hajj is valid, and this is the only place in the Shafi'i school where we differentiate between a fard and a wajib. Right? A fard is an integral. The Hajj is not valid without it. A wajib is a duty. The Hajj is valid without it. However, you're going to have an expiation. And also you're sinful if you miss it without an excuse. So one of those 5 duties we mentioned, if one of them is missed, the Hajj is still valid, but if it's missed without an excuse, it's sinful, and you have to expiate. La ilaha illallah. So his Hajj is valid, but he has to make a sacrificial slaughter. And there's some detail there. There's some detail there that's basically they're going to have to expiate. Like if you miss one night at Mina, you have to pay 0.51 liters of grain to the poor there in the Haram. So sometimes there's a partial expiation, not a complete dam, not a complete slaughter, sacrificial animal. And then there's an issue when you are not able to sacrifice, there's a way that you can fast instead. For instance, someone who does not possess a sacrificial animal. But essentially you have to make an expiation. And in summary, they call these expiation dam, meaning blood, that you slaughter, but not all of the expiations are in fact blood. Some of them may be feeding or may fasting and so on. If someone does, he has to make up a sacrificial. He will be in a state of sin if he misses it without a legitimate excuse. But there are excuses for missing some of them. Someone can miss the nights of Tashriq for an excuse. Muzdalifah may be missed for an excuse. In some cases, if you miss with an excuse, actually you're not even going to have an expiation. But if you miss without an excuse, it's sinful, and there will be an expiation. So one has to make tawbah for negligence and also correct the negligence by an expiation. But whoever misses out a sunnah, his Hajj is valid and he is not in a state of sin and does not have to pay dam, although he has missed out on a great deal of blessing. Right? So an integral, the Hajj is invalid. A duty, that missing it without an excuse entails sin and requires an expiation. And missing a sunnah, one just missed out on the good of that sunnah. However, the Hajj is valid and there isn't an expiation that has to be paid. And Allah knows best. And Allah knows best. Are there any questions on that? Yes.
So you're saying, excuse me, that if a woman loses purity when she's doing tawaf, in today's age, you're planning to get back. What would happen if she had to delay it she would have to wait there and her group would have to wait with her?
Like somebody that's escorting her, like her husband, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. They do it. Like our group, they said that happened to them, and they sent the sister to Medina for a period of time, changed her plane ticket, sent her to Medina for a period of time, made the necessary arrangements with Saudi authorities. She came back, completed it, went home. No. And ladies, typically, they'll know their custom, so they should plan accordingly. Sayyidatuna Aisha, it happened, and the Prophet ﷺ came in and she was crying, and he said to her that this is a matter that Allah has written on the daughters of Adam, alayhi salam. So it's something that happens, and he told her to do everything but tawaf until she was pure.
So is it then okay to take medications in order to plan your cycle?
It's valid and permissible. Even if being as Allah created us maybe is preferable, but it's valid and permissible.
Okay.
Yeah, it's valid and permissible. The question was if people manage their cycle through birth control, and it's valid and permissible to do that. But if they want to be as Allah created them, maybe there's merit in that as well. That's how our shuyukh taught that question. La ilaha illallah.
I have a question.
Yes.
If you, since being in Islam is an integral, and say you accidentally,
Ihram is an integral.
okay,
Yeah. But go ahead.
let's say you accidentally do something that violates Ihram, what do you do? Like, do you,
We are going to talk about that.
sorry.
Actually, he doesn't mention it here. Depending on the integral. Actually, let's do the muharramat, and then we'll talk about expiations a little bit. Okay, so that brings us, a sister asked, okay, ihram is an integral, and there are things that are prohibited in ihram. So what do you do if you break one of those prohibitions of this integral? The integral is still intact, because it's the entering of the state of ihram that is the integral. So no matter how many prohibitions one committed, you're going to have some expiations, but your integral of ihram is valid and your hajj is valid, assuming the other integrals are there. So the author says, it is not permitted for a man to cover his head. Right? It is not permitted for a man to cover his head, or for a woman to cover her face while in the state of ihram. They are not permitted to cover even part of them other than the part that a woman needs to cover to completely cover her face and her hair. She can cover a little bit beyond that. But they may not wear a niqab, for instance, cover their face, or wear a scarf that's covering more of the face than necessary to cover the borders of the face properly and the hair. La ilaha illallah. He doesn't include this, but this should be included. A man is not permitted to wear a garment that encompasses a part of his body. That's more accurate than saying a stitched garment, because a garment might be woven and not stitched, but it encompasses. So sleeves are a problem, pant legs are a problem, and things of that nature. So he can have an ihram cloth that is folded and hemmed over the border and stitched, and it's wrapped around his body, but not something that's sewn or woven or what have you, so that it encompasses a part of his body like that. So they say muhit. Lubsul muhit for a man is impermissible, as opposed to a woman. She may wear muhit. She just may not cover her face or hands. So a woman may not wear gloves. They are not permitted to cut their nails or hair. Right? Removal of hair and nails by any means is not permissible. So if you pluck your hair out accidentally while making wudu, that is a problem. As opposed to natural hair loss. Like if someone showers and they see hair in the bottom of the shower, it's okay. Because they didn't remove it. It just naturally fell out. If you pull it out though, one hair at a time, you owe an expiation of 0.51 liters of grain or a staple that must be paid to the poor. It's called a mud. And there you'll be buying it in liters, so that's relevant and should be paid to the poor of the haram. 2 at once, you owe 2 muds. 3 at once, you have to slaughter. La ilaha illallah. Whether it's done deliberately or accidentally, your removal of hair and nails requires an expiation. La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. They are not permitted to put oil on the hair of their head or their beard. And there's a huge difference of opinion about what facial hair you may put oil on and what you may not. Men should be very careful about their mustaches, even when they eat greasy food. And the beard certainly. and then the oil of the hair of the head. It is not permitted to put perfume or anything perfumed, like perfumed soap or shampoo or lotion, or perfumed food with rose water in it, or saffron, or burn incense and deliberately expose yourself to it, like bukhur. Any type of fragrance, the manner in which it's typically used, you must avoid it. Carrying fragrances in your luggage is okay. La ilaha illallah. It is not permitted to perform the marriage ceremony or have any sexual intimacy or foreplay. It is also not permissible to harm any animal, edible wild land animal, game animals. It's not permissible. Nor is it permissible to harm the life, animal life or plant life of the haram. The woman and the man are the same with regard to these prohibitions, excluding those associated with dress. Right? So then various prohibitions have slightly different expiations, but basically if you miss one of these, you have to expiate. A detail here, if you look at removal of hair and nails and killing animals and plants, that is destruction, right? Itlaf. Those forbidden things that are itlaf, it doesn't matter if you did it deliberately or indeliberately. And then if you look at clothing or perfume or oil that is applied to your hair, that's taraffut, that's luxury. Those forbidden things that are luxuries have to be done deliberately. So someone goes into a bathroom so-and-so. Oh, it's Hajj time. That soft soap must not have a fragrance. Let me use some. And they start to use it. And it turns out to be fragranced. They're not at fault. And nor is there an expiation. Because those things that are luxuries must be done deliberately. Similarly, if a man forgot and put his ihram over his head, and then someone said, hey, you're in ihram, he took it off real quick. He doesn't have an expiation because that was tarafa. As opposed to someone who, has a habit of pulling his beard and pulled out some hairs. Oh, got to expiate because that's itlaf. You're destroying that. So that's a little bit about muharramat. Just bear that in mind so that you know there's things you have to avoid. When you make Hajj, you have to study this section more thoroughly. The section on the integrals and the duties is actually excellent in this short treatment. However, this section on muharramat and expiations, the muharramat you should study more thoroughly, like from Reliance of the Traveler. For expiations, you got to ask someone. You need to have someone that you can ask. It's quite detailed. And many of the questions on Hajj are about those, about expiations. La ilaha illallah, which brings us to, how do we get out of this sacred state of ihram? It's an amazing state. The person who dies in ihram is resurrected saying labbaik Allahumma labbaik. So it's a great, great state to be in. However, one doesn't want to remain there forever. One wants to be released. So there is 2 phases of being released from ihram. 2 phases of being released from ihram. The first phase is accomplished by doing any 2 of 3 things. First phase is accomplished by what? 2 of 3 things. What are these things? Stoning al-Jamra al-Aqaba on the 10th. Removing hair. And the integral tawaf. When does the time for those begin? The time of those all 3 begins at the midpoint on the eve of the 10th. So you could be out of ihram by dawn on the 10th if you are able and young. You went into Mina, stoned Aqaba, and then after the midpoint of the night, there's people that will help you cut your hair right there. Remove your hair. Go into Mecca and do tawaf. You're fully out of ihram. But anyway, we didn't talk about that yet. So 2 of those 3 things, you're partially released. 2 of those 3. 2 of stoning the Jamra Aqaba, removing some hairs, and doing tawaf. It's sunnah to do them in that order, but it is not required. So you could go in and do tawaf and remove some hair and you're partially out of ihram. Come back and stone later. You can stone and remove some hair, and you're partially out of ihram, and do your tawaf later. Partial release from ihram means that all of these prohibited things are now permissible, excluding those associated with forbidden things with the opposite sex. You may not contract a marriage, nor may you have any intimate contact. That's partial release from ihram. Full release from ihram is accomplished by the third of those three. And when you're fully released, all of the prohibited things are now permissible. So again, there are two phases of release from ihram. The first phase is accomplished by two of these three. The second phase is accomplished by all three. And they are stoning the jamra, the great jamra, al-jamra al-kubra, jamrat al-aqaba, on the 10th. Removing hair by shaving and shortening, or any other means, and doing the rukn tawaf. When one has done all those three, one is completely out of ihram. When one has done two, one is partially released from ihram, and one can put on normal clothing and put on perfume and everything. However, anything associated with marriage or intimate contact, that still remains impermissible. And Allah knows best. And we have some time and we can take questions, inshaAllah ta'ala. And we've completed fiqh now of this text. We've completed the fiqh section of this text. We will begin with virtues and vices of the heart and limbs in our next lessons, inshallah. Yes?
So, these things, as far as like coming out of ihram, those are Hajj specific? Because do you stone the jamra if you're doing Umrah?
Thank you. That's released in Hajj. In Umrah, you're just released by Umrah, by the integrals of Umrah. By completing your Umrah, you're released. Yeah. So what? You enter ihram, you do tawaf, you do sa'i, you remove hair, you're out of ihram. Yeah.
If you have an injury to a nail, even if you clipped it, like you have an injury, you could just pull
If you have an injury to a nail, you can cut it the rest of the way off. Though that may entail an expiation, and I have to review for that. Oh, yeah. But if a nail is injured, you may remove it, and I have to review whether that entails an expiation or not. When you make Hajj, if you have to do it, ask when you're there, inshallah. Or if you want, badger me and I'll review it, inshallah. There's a whole chapter of expiations, and it gets quite detailed. Yes, sir.
Do you mind explaining the phrasing that you use not for stitching? Like I always hear it as stitching, but you kind of explain.
محيط. لبس المحيط. يحرم على الرجل لبس المحيط.
And how did you explain that in English? You said
It encompasses part of his body.
as opposed to the
يحيط
whole
به
body.
يعني.
Yeah.
يحيط به. His torso, sure. Shirt, the buttons around his torso, pinning his ihram around his torso. مشكلة. It surrounds part of his body. Yeah.
What did the ulama say regarding wearing something like a surgical mask?
I'm not asked. I wouldn't wear it though. Yeah, for a woman. For a woman, because it's a khalas. It's wearing something on your face. Yeah. The question is surgical masks. What do the contemporary scholars say about wearing surgical masks? And the answer I gave was I've never asked. I haven't asked, and that's one of the questions I'd like to ask my shuyukh when I visit. But personally, I wouldn't wear it if I were a woman. Yeah, for a man, holding something against your face that's not muhit, it shouldn't be impermissible. But from the point of view of the woman, then it's an issue. And also whether it's muhit.
Like, sometimes it can pull out like hairs from the beard as well.
Does it? It gets tangled and pulls it out? Yeah. Then, yeah. You gotta be on madhab la adwa wa la tirata for that one. Nothing is contagious. Yeah. I was drinking Zamzam a whole lot for protection from Ebola while I was on Hajj. And there's so many times I was smashed against a bunch of Africans. Going into the Roldat, the Black Stone, all kind of places. And I was drinking, but I mean, you can't wear a surgical mask. And that's not a fatwa, but yeah, there's a question?
Well, I just said the masks don't do any good anyway.
Oh, yeah.
They get all damp and then it's a conductor for organisms.
Huh. Yeah. It's a conductor of organisms and waswasa. Allahu Akbar. Yes, sister.
So, as far as like, say you're doing Umrah, you set out like, you're not on your period. You set out to do Umrah. That takes you some hours. By the time you get back to your room, you notice that, okay, you started your period. Like,
Yeah.
can you just say you did it? Like once you've already done everything, you cut your hair and then you go and you're like,
There is a qaida in fiqh that things are assumed to occur at the last possible time. Yeah. There was a question, a woman said, if someone did Umrah and got back to their hotel room and found out they had begun menstruation, there's a maxim in fiqh that things occur at their last possible time. So until she sees that, she doesn't assume that she menstruated anything more than an instant before seeing it. Yeah. La ilaha illallah, son, that's our time. But actually 4 more minutes. Yeah, so if there are any questions, we could take them. We'll remind everybody that we're going to give, over the next couple of days, a take-home midterm that they'll have a week to complete, inshallah, and it will come out through the list for this and tafsir. And you've already had Sidi Tafsirs, which should be completed over the next couple of days for the week, inshallah ta'ala. And do they have instructions as to how to return that digitally?
I believe they can do it online, but I've been traveling, so I haven't even looked at it. So I just put out the questions.
Okay.
He posted them.
He posted them. I saw this post. Yeah.
In the email it says that if you can't do it through the classroom, you can make your own document with the answers to the questions and then email them back.
Okay. Very good. There's a way to do it through the classroom, though.
Yeah, you can do it all. It tells me.
And those that are local following online should complete these evaluations. That's a nice way to say it nowadays. These evaluations. People who are just auditing at distance, you needn't complete them. If you gain access to it and want to review it, that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. If anyone wants to help you get it, that's fine. Barakallahu fikum. We ask Allah to give us to be sincere, true, that He accept our works, give us good teaching, calling to guidance, and that He be pleased with us and please the heart of His Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and that the reward of the Fatiha that we recite goes to our parents, teachers, sheikhs, those who we owe rights, and the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Fatiha.